The sun had barely risen when Ethan Carter opened his eyes, his heart beating with a mixture of anxiety and determination. Today was the day. His first big hearing since graduating from law school. He sat up in bed, running his hands over his face to wipe away the last vestiges of sleep. The room, still immersed in the gloom of dawn, seemed different this morning. Quieter, more solemn. Ethan got up and walked over to the window, opening the curtains to let in the soft morning light. Outside, the city was starting to wake up, the first cars already driving through the streets, the lights of the buildings coming on one by one. It was as if the whole world was preparing with him for this crucial moment. As he got dressed, carefully putting on the suit he had sorted the night before, Ethan couldn't shake the thought of his father. John Carter had been a respected lawyer, known for his integrity and dedication to justice. Ethan had always dreamed of following in his footsteps, and now, finally, he was about to take his first big step in that direction. "Dad," Ethan muttered to himself, adjusting his tie in front of the mirror. "I hope you're proud." His eyes wandered around the room, landing on the framed photograph on the bedside table. In it, a younger Ethan was smiling next to his father, both wearing graduation gowns. It was the day Ethan had graduated from high school, and John was beaming with pride. The memory made Ethan's heart squeeze. His father hadn't lived to see him graduate from law school, but Ethan knew he would be there in spirit, guiding his steps. With a deep sigh, Ethan finished getting ready and went downstairs to the kitchen. His mother, Sarah, was already there, preparing breakfast. "Good morning, darling," she said with a warm smile. "Ready for the big day?" Ethan nodded, taking a seat at the table. "As ready as I can be, Mom." Sarah placed a plate of eggs and toast in front of him, along with a steaming cup of coffee. "Your father would be so proud of you, Ethan. He always knew you'd do great things." His mother's words brought a lump to Ethan's throat. He swallowed, trying to keep his composure. "Thanks, Mom. I just want to do the right thing, like he always did." Sarah gently squeezed her son's shoulder. "And you will, darling. You have his heart." After breakfast, Ethan went back up to his room to get his briefcase. It was then that his eyes landed on the desk drawer where he kept his father's most precious belongings. He hesitated for a moment before opening it. Inside, carefully stored in a velvet box, was his father's antique pen. It was an elegant piece, with gold details and the name John Carter delicately engraved on the side. Ethan took it reverently, feeling the familiar weight in his hands. This pen had been more than just a writing instrument for John Carter. It was a symbol of his integrity, a constant reminder of the oath he had taken to always fight for justice. Ethan remembered seeing his father use this pen countless times, signing important documents, making notes during difficult cases, always with the same dedication and care. For a moment, Ethan stood there, holding the pen, lost in his memories. He remembered a conversation he'd had with his father years ago, shortly before John fell ill. "Ethan," his father had said, his eyes shining with a mixture of pride and seriousness, "always remember that being a lawyer isn't just about winning cases. It's about doing the right thing, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." Those words echoed in Ethan's mind now, as clear as the day they were spoken. He looked at the pen in his hand and made a decision. He was going to take it with him to the hearing. It was as if, somehow, he was taking a piece of his father with him, a source of strength and inspiration. Carefully, Ethan placed the pen in his inside jacket pocket, close to his heart. He picked up his briefcase and went downstairs, where his mother was waiting to say goodbye. "Good luck, my love," said Sarah, hugging him tightly. "You're going to do wonderfully well." Ethan returned the hug, feeling a wave of gratitude for all the support his mother had always given him. "Thanks, Mom, for everything." As he left the house, Ethan felt the weight of responsibility on his shoulders, but also a renewed determination. The walk to the courthouse seemed longer than usual, each step echoing with the importance of the moment. The city streets were busy, people hurrying to work, cars honking in the morning traffic. But for Ethan, everything seemed to be in slow motion. He watched the faces of the people passing by, imagining their stories, their problems, their hopes. It was for these people that he had chosen to become a lawyer, to make a difference, to fight for justice, just as his father had done. When he reached the imposing court building, Ethan stopped for a moment, looking at the marble facade and the huge columns that seemed to touch the sky. He took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the pen in his pocket like a comforting talisman. "I'm ready, Dad," he muttered to himself, climbing the steps with firm steps. Inside the courthouse, the buzz of voices and the constant movement of lawyers, officials, and citizens created an atmosphere of anticipation. Ethan greeted some colleagues with a nod, maintaining his professional composure despite the nervousness he felt inside. As he walked through the corridors towards the courtroom, Ethan couldn't help but notice the curious looks that some people were giving him. He knew that many there had known and respected his father, and were now watching his son, waiting to see if he would live up to John Carter's legacy. Standing in front of the courtroom doors, Ethan closed his eyes for a brief moment. His hand instinctively reached into the pocket where his father's pen was. In that instant, he felt a wave of calm and determination wash over him. "You can do this, Ethan," he said to himself. "Do the right thing, always." With one last deep breath, Ethan opened his eyes, straightened his shoulders, and pushed open the doors. It was time to face his destiny, to take the first step on his journey as a lawyer. And as he walked into the room, his father's pen close to his heart, Ethan knew that no matter what happened, he wouldn't be alone. Young lawyer Ethan Carter was ready for his first big hearing, carrying with him not just an old pen, but the full weight of his father's legacy, expectations, and dreams. What he didn't yet know was that that simple pen was about to trigger a series of events that would change his life forever. The courtroom was buzzing with the typical energy of a busy morning. Lawyers whispered with their clients, bailiffs organized piles of documents, and the constant buzz of hushed conversations filled the air. Ethan Carter was sitting at the defense table, his hands slightly shaking as he organized his papers for the third time. The side door opened, and the bailiff announced in a firm voice, "All rise for the Honorable Judge Benjamin Thompson." Silence fell over the room as Judge Thompson, a middle-aged man with gray hair and piercing eyes, entered with measured steps. His stern face betrayed no emotion as he took his place behind the lectern. "Please be seated," he said, his voice resonating through the room. "We are here today for the state's case against Markham Industries. Mr. Carter, I understand this is your first major hearing. Are you prepared to proceed?" Ethan stood up, feeling the weight of all the stares on him. "Yes, Your Honor," he replied, his voice firmer than he expected. Judge Thompson nodded. "Very well. You may begin with your opening statement." Ethan took a deep breath, his fingers unconsciously rubbing against his father's pen in his jacket pocket. It was as if he could feel John Carter's strength and confidence flowing through that object. "Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Ethan began, his voice gaining strength with each word. "We are here today because Markham Industries has chosen to put profit before the safety of its employees and the community." As Ethan presented his case, detailing Markham Industries' environmental and safety violations, he could feel the atmosphere in the room changing. The jurors leaned forward, attentive. Opposing counsel was frowning, furiously taking notes. Ethan was in the middle of a particularly complex explanation about the levels of toxins found in the soil around the Markham plant when he decided to use a graph to illustrate his point. He leaned over the table to pick up his briefcase, and in that movement, his father's pen slipped out of his pocket, falling onto the table with a soft metallic clang. It was at that moment that something extraordinary happened. Judge Thompson, who until then had been listening attentively with his usual impassive expression, suddenly paled. His eyes went wide, fixed on the pen on Ethan's desk. "That pen," murmured the judge, his voice shaky and almost inaudible. Ethan, confused, looked at the pen and then back at the judge. "Your Honor, is everything all right?" But Judge Thompson didn't answer. His face had lost all color, and he seemed to be having trouble breathing. Before anyone could react, the judge's eyes rolled back and he slumped forward, falling onto the lectern with a thud. Chaos erupted in the room. Shouts of surprise and shock echoed off the walls. The bailiff ran to the judge, shouting for a doctor. Lawyers and spectators stood up, some running to help, others backing away in panic. Ethan stood paralyzed for a moment, his brain struggling to process what had just happened. Then, as if awakened from a trance, he moved. He picked up the pen and quickly put it away in his pocket, a strange feeling that object was somehow at the center of this surreal event. "Stand back! Give me room!" someone shouted. A woman identified herself as a doctor and rushed to the judge's side. The next few minutes passed in a blur of frantic activity. Paramedics arrived, the judge was put on a stretcher and rushed to hospital. The hearing was suspended, of course. The jurors were dismissed, and the lawyers were instructed to await further information. Ethan found himself in the courtroom corridor, still dazed, surrounded by a whirlwind of speculative voices. "Did you see his face before he fainted?" whispered one lawyer to another. "He looked like he'd seen a ghost." "I heard he has heart problems," said another. "Maybe it was a stroke." Ethan could barely hear the conversations around him. His mind was focused on a single fact. Judge Thompson had looked directly at his father's pen before passing out. It couldn't be a coincidence, could it? "Mr. Carter." Ethan turned to find the bailiff looking at him with a serious expression. "Yes?" "Judge Thompson has asked to see you in his chambers as soon as you're feeling better. He's been taken to the hospital for observation, but he insisted on speaking to you later today." Ethan felt a chill in his stomach. "With me? Are you sure?" The officer nodded. "Yes, sir." He was quite emphatic about it. The next few hours passed in a blur of anxiety and speculation for Ethan. He tried to concentrate on his work, reviewing case notes, but his mind kept going back to the moment the judge fainted, to the look of shock and recognition in his eyes when he saw the pen. Finally, in the late afternoon, Ethan received the call he had been waiting for. Judge Thompson had returned to court and wanted to see him immediately. With his heart racing, Ethan made his way to the judge's chambers. When he entered, he found Benjamin Thompson sitting behind his desk, looking pale and tired, but with alert, intense eyes. "Mr. Carter," said the judge, his voice hoarse, "please sit down." Ethan obeyed, feeling as if he was about to be judged himself. "That pen," began Judge Thompson without preamble. "The one you had in the courtroom. May I see it?" With hesitation, Ethan took the pen out of his pocket and placed it on the table. The judge picked it up with trembling hands, examining it closely. "Where did you get this?" he asked, his voice barely disguising a mixture of emotions, fear, awe, maybe even a hint of hope. "It was my father's," Ethan replied. "John Carter. John Carter," interrupted the judge, closing his eyes as if the name had physically struck him. "Of course. I should have known. You look just like him." Ethan blinked, surprised. "You knew my father?" Judge Thompson opened his eyes, fixing Ethan with a penetrating stare. "Mr. Carter..." "Ethan, what I'm about to tell you will change your life forever. This pen, it's at the center of one of the most important and dangerous cases I've ever tried, a case that was never really closed." He paused, seeming to weigh his next words carefully. "Your father was involved, and now, it seems to me, so are you." Ethan felt as if the ground had disappeared from under his feet. I don't understand." What case? How was my father involved? Judge Thompson sighed deeply. It's a long story, Mr. Carter. A story of corruption, secrets, and danger. And I fear that by bringing this pen to court today, you have inadvertently reopened a Pandora's box that many would like to remain closed forever. He leaned forward, his eyes never leaving Ethan's. The question is, are you prepared for the truth? Because once I start talking, there will be no turning back. Your life, your career, everything you thought you knew about your father. It could all change. Ethan felt the weight of those words, the fear of the unknown fighting against his need to know the truth. Finally, he nodded slowly. I'm ready, Your Honor. Please tell me everything. And so, in that silent room, with the old pen between them like a bridge between past and present, Judge Benjamin Thompson began to unravel a secret that had remained buried for years, a secret that threatened to shake the foundations of the justice system and change Ethan Carter's life forever. Judge Thompson's office seemed to shrink as the silence stretched between them. Ethan felt the weight of the pen in his hands, now much more than a simple heirloom. It was a key to a dark past, a portal to truths that could change everything he believed he knew about his father and himself. The judge took a deep breath, his tired eyes fixed on Ethan. Your father, John Carter, was more than just a brilliant lawyer, Ethan. He was a brave man, determined to expose the corruption that infested our justice system. Ethan felt his heart race. Corruption? But how? 15 years ago, Thompson began, his voice low and serious. Your father uncovered evidence of a network of bribes and blackmail that involved judges, prosecutors, and even high-ranking politicians. It was a scheme so elaborate and deep that it threatened the very foundations of our justice system. The judge paused, his eyes straying into distant memories. John came to me, trusting that I would help him. He had gathered evidence, documents, recordings, all stored on microfilm hidden inside this pen. Ethan stared at the pen in his hands in disbelief. Inside this pen? Thompson nodded. It's an ingenious mechanism. The body of the pen unscrews in a specific way, revealing a secret compartment. Your father was brilliant, Ethan. He knew he needed to keep the evidence safe and mobile. But why didn't he ever tell me about this? Ethan asked, his voice shaking with emotion. To protect you and your mother, Thompson replied with a heavy sigh. The people involved in this scheme were dangerous, Ethan. They still are. Your father knew that the less you knew, the safer you would be. Ethan felt a wave of conflicting emotions, pride in the father he never really knew, fear of the implications of these revelations, and a deep sadness at the burden John Carter had carried alone. What happened next? Asked Ethan, not sure if he really wanted to hear the answer. Thompson leaned back in his chair, the weight of years visible on his shoulders. We started investigating discreetly. Your father and I, along with a small group of trusted people. We were making progress, gathering more evidence, identifying the main players in this corrupt scheme. The judge paused, his eyes filling with a deep sadness. But then, your father fell ill. Ethan felt a lump in his throat. His father's illness had been sudden and devastating, taking him in a matter of months. Now he wondered if there was more to this story than just bad luck. Do you think his illness had anything to do with the investigation? Asked Ethan, dreading the answer. Thompson hesitated for a moment. I can't say for sure, Ethan, but the timing was too convenient to be a coincidence. Ethan felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath his feet. The idea that his father could have been murdered, that his death could have been more than a natural tragedy, was almost unbearable. After his father died, Thompson continued, the investigation lost momentum. Without the evidence John had gathered, which we believed was in the pen, we had no way to proceed. I failed him, Ethan. I couldn't finish what we started. Ethan looked at the judge, seeing for the first time not the imposing figure of the courtroom, but a tired man carrying the weight of promises unfulfilled and justice not achieved. "But now," Thompson said, a glint of hope in his eyes, "with the pen back, maybe we can finally expose the truth. Honor your father's legacy." Ethan felt a determination grow inside him. "What do we need to do?" Thompson leaned forward, his voice low and urgent. "First, we need to recover the evidence from the pen. Then we'll have to investigate carefully. Many of those involved are still in positions of power, Ethan. That will be dangerous." At that moment, a knock on the door interrupted the conversation. The judge's secretary entered, looking nervous. "Sorry to interrupt, Your Honor, but there are 2 detectives here. They insist on talking to you and Mr. Carter." Ethan and Thompson exchanged worried glances. The judge nodded slowly. "Send them in." 2 men in suits entered the office, their faces serious and inexpressive. "Judge Thompson, Mr. Carter," said the taller of the 2, flashing his badge. "I'm Detective Ramirez, and this is my partner, Detective Chen. We need to ask you some questions about this morning's incident in court." Ethan felt Ramirez's penetrating gaze on him and instinctively closed his hand around the pen in his pocket. "Of course, detectives," Thompson replied with a calmness that Ethan envied. "How can I help you?" Ramirez turned to Ethan. "Mr. Carter, witnesses reported that Judge Thompson seemed to react to something on his desk moments before he passed out. Can you tell us what happened?" Ethan felt the weight of everyone's gaze in the room. His mind raced, torn between the truth he had just discovered and the need to protect that information. I'm not sure," he began, choosing his words carefully. "I was presenting my case and—" "Mr. Carter was just doing his job, detectives," Thompson interrupted. "My fainting spell was the result of stress and fatigue. Nothing more." Detective Chen frowned. "With all due respect, Your Honor, we'd like to hear Mr. Carter's side of the story." Ethan felt a bead of sweat run down his back. He knew that what he said now could change the course of everything. "As I was saying," Ethan continued, finding a courage he didn't know he possessed, "I was presenting my case. I didn't notice anything out of the ordinary until the moment Judge Thompson fainted." Ramirez watched him for a long moment, his eyes searching for any sign of a lie. "I see. And there was nothing on your desk that could have provoked a reaction in the judge?" Ethan felt the weight of the pen in his pocket as if it were made of lead. "No, sir, just my case documents." The detectives exchanged glances, clearly unconvinced. "Well, if you think of anything else, Mr. Carter, please contact us," said Ramirez, handing him a card. "We'll be investigating this incident thoroughly." After the detectives left, Ethan and Thompson remained silent for a few moments, the weight of what they had discussed and what was to come hanging over them. "Ethan," Thompson finally said, his voice low and urgent, "from now on, you need to be extremely careful. Trust no one but me. The pen, guard it well. It's our only hope of exposing the truth and clearing your father's name." Ethan nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. "What do we do now?" "Go home, examine the pen. Find out what your father left for us. Tomorrow, we'll meet somewhere safe to discuss our next steps." As he left the judge's office, Ethan felt as if he was entering a completely new world, a world of secrets, danger, and conspiracies, a world he wasn't prepared for, but one he would have to navigate if he wanted to honor his father's memory and bring justice. With his pen safely in his pocket and his mind filled with unanswered questions, Ethan Carter took the first steps on a journey that would change his life forever. His father's legacy, buried so long ago, was about to come to light, and with it, a web of lies and betrayal that threatened to shake the foundations of the justice he had sworn to uphold. Night was falling over the city when Ethan finally arrived home. The apartment, normally a haven of peace after a long day in court, now seemed strange and even threatening. Shadows seemed to move in the corners, and every creak of the floorboards made his heart leap. With trembling hands, Ethan closed all the curtains and double-checked that the door was locked. Only then did he allow himself to take a deep breath, reverently taking his pen out of his pocket. In the soft light of the lamp, the object looked innocent, just a relic of a beloved father. But Ethan knew that inside that metal cylinder lay secrets that could shake the foundations of the justice system. "Okay, Dad," Ethan muttered to himself. "Show me what you found." Following Judge Thompson's instructions, Ethan began to manipulate the pen, turning and pulling different parts until he heard a soft click. The body of the pen opened, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside was a small roll of microfilm, no bigger than his little finger. Ethan's heart raced. There it was, the evidence his father had risked everything to collect. But how could he see what was recorded there? At that moment, a knock on the door made him freeze. Who could it be at that time? The detectives? Someone more sinister? Carefully, Ethan hid the pen and microfilm and approached the door. "Who is it?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "Ethan, it's me, Clara Reynolds. Can we talk?" Clara Reynolds. The name sounded familiar, but Ethan couldn't remember where. Cautiously, he opened the door, keeping the safety chain in place. On the other side, a woman of about 30 stared at him. Dark hair framed a determined face, and her eyes shone with a mixture of intelligence and urgency. "I'm sorry to barge in on you like this," she said, her voice low and rapid. "But after what happened in court today, I knew I needed to talk to you." Ethan frowned. "How do you know where I live? And what exactly do you want?" Clara glanced sideways down the corridor, as if to check whether they were being watched. "I'm an investigative journalist. I have sources. And what I want, Ethan, is the truth about the case your father was investigating before he died." Ethan's blood ran cold. How could she know about this? For a moment, he considered closing the door, pretending that none of this was happening. But something in Clara's eyes, a mixture of determination and compassion, made him hesitate. "Why should I trust you?" he asked, still keeping the door half closed. Clara sighed. "Because I'm also investigating corruption in the justice system, and because your father, before he died, was one of my sources." Those words hit Ethan like a punch in the gut. His father, working with a journalist? There was so much he didn't know, so many secrets. After a moment's hesitation, Ethan removed the chain and opened the door. "Come in, but make it quick." Once inside the apartment, Clara immediately began to speak, her words coming out in an urgent torrent. "Your father came to me about a year ago before he died. He had uncovered something big, Ethan, a network of corruption that went far beyond a few dishonest judges or lawyers. We're talking about high-ranking politicians, powerful businessmen, even international connections." Ethan sat down heavily on the sofa, his mind spinning with the implications. Why didn't he ever tell me? Clara sat down next to him, her face softening with understanding. "To protect you and your mother. The less you knew, the safer you'd be." "But now," began Ethan. "Now you're at the center of it all," Clara added. "The pen, Ethan. Your father mentioned a pen with crucial evidence. Do you have it?" Ethan hesitated. Trusting this woman he barely knew could be dangerous. But on the other hand, he needed help. He couldn't face this alone. "Yes," he finally admitted. "I have the pen, and the microfilm inside it." Clara's eyes widened. "Have you seen what's on the microfilm?" Ethan shook his head. "I can't see it. I need special equipment, I imagine." Clara smiled for the first time since she had arrived. "I have access to that equipment. We can look at it together if you trust me." Just then, Ethan's phone rang, making them both jump. It was his mother. "Hi, Mom," Ethan answered, trying to keep his voice calm. "Ethan, darling," Sarah's voice sounded worried. "I've just had a strange call. A man asking about your father's belongings, especially an old pen. He said he was from the police, but something didn't seem right." Ethan's heart raced. "Mom, listen carefully. Don't open the door for anyone. I'll send someone reliable to pick you up, okay? Stay safe." After hanging up, Ethan turned to Clara, fear evident in his eyes. "They're after the pen, and now they know my mother exists." Clara stood up, determination in every line of her body. "We have to act fast. Your mother first, then the microfilm. I know a safe place where we can hide and analyze the evidence." Ethan hesitated for just a second before nodding. "Okay, let's do it." For the next few minutes, it was like Ethan was living in an action movie. Clara made a few quick calls, arranging for a trusted friend to pick Sarah up and take her to safety. Meanwhile, Ethan gathered some essential belongings and, of course, the precious pen. When they left the apartment, the night seemed even darker and more threatening. Clara guided them through alleyways and back streets, always alert to any sign of danger. "Where are we going?" asked Ethan, as they sneaked down yet another poorly lit street. "To a place few people know about," replied Clara. "A refuge for journalists and activists who need to hide. There we'll have the equipment we need to view the microfilm and plan our next steps." As they walked, Ethan couldn't help thinking about how drastically his life had changed in less than 24 hours. From a young lawyer looking forward to his first big hearing, he now found himself in the middle of a conspiracy, on the run from powerful, unknown forces. "Clara," he said, his voice low, "when this is all over, if we manage to expose the truth, what happens then?" Clara paused for a moment, turning to face him. In the dim light of a distant street lamp, Ethan could see the mixture of determination and compassion in her eyes. "The truth doesn't always bring peace, Ethan," she said softly, "but it does bring justice. And sometimes, that's what we need to move on." Ethan nodded, feeling the weight of the pen in his pocket. That small object carried not only the evidence of a corrupt scheme, but also his father's legacy, his hopes, and his fears. As they resumed their journey through the night, Ethan knew he was heading not just for a temporary refuge, but for an uncertain future. A future where the truth, however painful, would finally come out. And he was determined to see it happen, no matter the cost. The distant sound of sirens made them hasten their pace. The city around them seemed to vibrate with a dark energy, as if it knew that long-buried secrets were about to be revealed. And at the center of it all, Ethan Carter, carrying his father's legacy and the weight of a truth yet to be told, was moving forward into the unknown. The dim light of dawn seeped through the gaps in the dusty curtains when Ethan finally opened his eyes. For a brief moment, he wondered where he was, until the memories of the night before flooded his mind like a relentless torrent. Clara's secret refuge, the escape across town, the weight of the pen in his pocket, it all came back with frightening clarity. Taking a seat on the makeshift bed, Ethan observed the small room that now served as his hiding place. Peeling walls, an old desk in the corner, and piles of newspapers and documents scattered across the floor. This was the sanctuary of journalists and activists fighting corruption, a place where the truth found shelter from the shadows of power. A soft knock on the door brought him out of his thoughts. "Ethan, are you awake?" Clara's voice sounded tired but determined. "Yes, come in," he replied, wiping his hands across his face in a vain attempt to ward off his fatigue. Clara entered carrying 2 steaming cups of coffee. Her eyes, although surrounded by deep, dark circles, shone with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. "I've managed to contact your mother," she said, handing Ethan one of the cups. "She's safe, in a place that even I don't know where it is. It's better this way for now. Ethan felt a lump in his throat unravel a little. At least his mother was protected. Thank you, Clara, for all this. She nodded, taking a seat on the edge of the bed. Don't thank me yet. What lies ahead? Well, it's not going to be easy. The microfilm, muttered Ethan, suddenly remembering. Did you see what's on it? Clara bit her lip, hesitating. Yes, I spent the night analyzing it. Ethan, what your father discovered, it's bigger than we imagined. Much bigger. She stood up, walking over to the desk in the corner of the room. From a folder, she took out several sheets of paper covered in notes and some photographs. Your father has mapped out an intricate network of corruption that stretches from the judiciary to the highest echelons of government. We have names, dates, bribe amounts, details of illegal operations. Ethan picked up one of the sheets, his eyes roaming over the names listed. Judges he respected, politicians he admired, businessmen held up as examples of success, all implicated in a web of lies and betrayal. My God, he whispered, feeling the weight of the truth on his shoulders. How are we going to deal with this? Clara sat up again, her eyes meeting Ethan's with an intensity that made him shudder. We have to be very careful, Ethan. The people on this list, they have the power to crush us like bugs if they find out what we know. At that moment, a loud knock on the door made them jump. Clara immediately gathered up the papers, quickly hiding them. Who is it? She called out, her voice tense. It's me, Marcus, came the reply from the other side. We have a problem. Clara opened the door, revealing a tall, thin man with gray hair and restless eyes. He entered quickly, closing the door behind him. Clara, they're moving. My contacts at the police say there's an operation underway to locate Ethan Carter and evidence relating to a national security case. Ethan felt the blood freeze in his veins. Do they know about the pen? Marcus nodded gravely. It would seem so. And it's not just ordinary police officers. There are federal agents involved. Clara cursed softly, her mind clearly working at a speed. We need a plan. We can't just stay hidden forever. It was then that Ethan had an idea. A crazy, dangerous idea, but one that could be their only chance. What if we used the media? He suggested, earning surprised looks from Clara and Marcus. My father was respected. He had connections. If we could tell this story, expose everything at once. It would be suicide, Marcus interrupted, shaking his head. They'd silence us before we could say a word. But Clara was thoughtful, a glimmer of hope in her eyes. Maybe not, if we do it the right way, a live broadcast on multiple channels simultaneously, with the evidence being posted online at the same time. That could work, Marcus agreed slowly, but we'd need help. A lot of help. The next few hours passed in a whirlwind of frantic planning. Clara activated her network of contacts, journalists and activists willing to risk everything for the truth. Marcus used his connections in the tech underworld to prepare a secure platform for disseminating the evidence. Meanwhile, Ethan found himself plunged into an internal conflict. Every new detail he discovered about the extent of the corruption made him question everything he believed in. The system he had sworn to defend was rotten to the core. How could he remain a lawyer after that? Amid the chaos of planning, Ethan found a moment to be alone. Sitting in a corner of the room, he took his pen out of his pocket, twirling it between his fingers. Dad, he murmured, feeling tears forming in his eyes. I hope I'm doing the right thing. I hope you're proud. A soft touch on his shoulder surprised him. It was Clara, her face a mixture of understanding and determination. Your father would be proud, Ethan, she said softly. He started this fight, and now you have the chance to finish it. Ethan nodded, wiping away his tears. But at what cost, Clara? Once we've exposed all this, nothing will be the same. Clara sat down next to him, her eyes fixed on the horizon visible through the small window. Change is never easy, Ethan. But sometimes it's necessary. What your father has discovered, what you are about to reveal. This could be the catalyst for a real reform in our system. Clara's words brought a new sense of purpose to Ethan. Yes, the road ahead would be difficult, even dangerous, but it was the right path. So, what's the next step? He asked, feeling a new determination growing inside him. Clara smiled, a smile that mixed courage with a touch of mischief. Now, my dear, let's make history. The next few hours were a whirlwind of activity. Ethan worked side by side with Clara and Marcus, preparing documents, organizing the evidence, rehearsing what they would say when the cameras were turned on. As night fell, the tension in the small apartment was palpable. Tomorrow at noon, they would go public with everything. There was no turning back now. While the others made their final preparations, Ethan found himself alone with his thoughts again. He picked up his phone, looking at the picture of his father on the screen. "We're almost there, Dad," he whispered. "The truth is going to come out. I hope that, wherever you are, you can see it." A sudden sound outside the window made him freeze. For a moment, he feared that they had been discovered, but it was only the wind shaking a branch against the glass. Ethan took a deep breath, trying to calm his nerves. Tomorrow would be the most important day of his life. The day he would face not only the corruption his father had uncovered, but also his own fears and doubts. With one last look at his father's photo, Ethan prepared himself for the night of vigil that awaited them. Tomorrow, the world would change, and he would be at the center of that change, carrying his father's legacy and the hope of a fairer future. The pen in his pocket, once a simple object of remembrance, now weighed down with the responsibility of changing the course of history. Ethan knew that no matter what happened tomorrow, nothing would ever be the same. And somehow, this certainty brought both fear and hope. Dawn was breaking over the city, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange, as if the universe itself were announcing the arrival of a new day. But for Ethan Carter, Clara Reynolds, and their small team of allies, this wasn't just another dawn. It was the prelude to a revolution. In the small apartment that served as their hideout and headquarters, the tension was palpable. Ethan was sitting at the kitchen table, his eyes fixed on his father's pen, nervously twirling it between his fingers. Each turn of the object carried with it the weight of responsibility, of the lives that would be affected by the revelation they were about to make. Clara entered the kitchen, her hair disheveled and deep circles under her eyes testifying to the sleepless night. She placed a cup of strong coffee in front of Ethan. "Did you get any sleep?" she asked, her voice soft but laden with concern. Ethan shook his head negatively. "Not for a second. Did you?" "Not either," Clara admitted, sitting down next to him. "But maybe it's for the best. We need to be alert." The silence that followed was heavy, laden with all the unspoken words, all the fears and hopes they shared. Finally, Ethan broke the silence. "Clara, what if we're making a mistake? What if, by exposing all this, we do more harm than good?" Clara looked at him, her eyes reflecting a mixture of understanding and determination. "Ethan, do you remember what your father used to say? The truth may be painful, but it's the only remedy for injustice. He knew the risks, as do we. But he also knew it was the right thing to do." Clara's words brought to Ethan's mind a distant memory. He was just 12 years old when his father defended a particularly difficult case, exposing the corruption of a local politician. The family had received threats, and Ethan remembered being terrified. "Dad, why don't you give up?" young Ethan had asked, with tears in his eyes. John Carter knelt down in front of his son, putting his hands on his shoulders. "Ethan, sometimes we have to face our fears in order to do the right thing. Courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision that something is more important." than fear. Back in the present, Ethan felt a wave of determination wash over him. His father had died fighting for this truth. Now it was his turn to carry the baton. "You're right, Clara," he said, straightening his shoulders. "Let's do it." The next few hours passed in a blur of frenetic activity. Marcus, the technology expert, was making the final adjustments to the system that would transmit the evidence to multiple servers around the world, ensuring that the information could not be suppressed. Other members of the team, journalists and activists who had joined the cause, were preparing press releases and organizing the logistics for the live broadcast. At 11:30, half an hour before the scheduled broadcast time, Ethan received an unexpected call. The number was unknown, but something compelled him to answer. "Hello? Ethan, it's Judge Thompson." Ethan felt a shiver run down his spine. "Your Honor? How?" "There's no time for explanations," Thompson interrupted, his voice urgent. "Ethan, they know. The operation to silence you is underway. You need to move, now." No sooner had the words left the judge's lips than the sound of breaking glass echoed through the apartment. Shouts of "Police! Freeze!" filled the air. "Clara!" shouted Ethan, running into the main room. "We have to go!" Chaos ensued. Team members were running in all directions, some trying to salvage equipment, others looking for escape routes. Clara grabbed a laptop and a bag containing crucial documents. "This way!" shouted Marcus, opening a hatch in the floor that Ethan didn't even know existed. "There's a tunnel that leads to the building next door." One by one, they climbed down through the hatch. Ethan could hear the heavy footsteps of the policeman approaching. When it was his turn to climb down, he hesitated for a moment, looking back. His father's pen was still on the kitchen table. "Ethan, let's go!" urged Clara from below. His heart squeezing, Ethan made a decision. He ran back to the kitchen, picked up the pen, and, on impulse, threw it out of the open window. It landed in a bush in the neighboring building's yard. Seconds later, he was climbing down the hatch, closing it behind him, just in time to hear the apartment door being kicked in. The tunnel was narrow and damp, lit only by the dim light of cell phones. They ran for several minutes, the sound of their panting breaths echoing off the concrete walls. Finally, they emerged into a dusty basement. Marcus guided them through a series of corridors and stairs until they emerged onto a busy street, blending in with the crowd. "What now?" asked Ethan, still panting. Clara checked her watch. "We have 20 minutes until the scheduled time. We need to find somewhere to broadcast." It was then that Ethan had an idea. "I know where we can go." 15 minutes later, they were in Judge Thompson's office at the courthouse. The judge welcomed them with a mixture of relief and concern. "You're crazy to come here," he said, but there was a glint of admiration in his eyes. "It's the last place they'd look for us," Ethan replied, "and we have all the equipment we need here." They quickly set up the laptop and connected it to the courthouse's high-speed internet. Marcus made the final technical adjustments, while Clara and Ethan prepared themselves in front of the camera. "We're on air in 3, 2, 1, announced Marcus. Ethan looked directly into the camera, feeling the weight of the moment. "Good afternoon. My name is Ethan Carter. What I'm about to reveal will forever change the way we view our justice system." In the minutes that followed, Ethan and Clara presented the evidence collected by John Carter, exposing the network of corruption that stretched through the highest echelons of government and the judiciary. Names were revealed, documents were shown, the truth finally came out. As they spoke, Ethan could feel the world changing around him. He knew there was no turning back, that from that moment on, nothing would be the same. When they finished the broadcast, a heavy silence fell over the room. It was Judge Thompson who broke it. "You made history today," he said, his voice laced with emotion. John would be proud. Ethan nodded, feeling a mixture of exhaustion and relief. He looked at Clara, who was smiling through her tears. "What now?" she asked. Ethan looked out of the window, seeing the city outside, a city that had just had its foundations shaken by the truth. "Now," he said, "we start to rebuild, one brick at a time." The sound of sirens in the distance reminded them that the fight wasn't over yet. But for the first time since this whole journey had begun, Ethan felt hope. The truth was out there now, impossible to ignore or suppress. As they prepared to face whatever came next, Ethan knew that no matter what happened, he had honored his father's legacy. The pen may have been lost, but the truth it carried was finally free. And in that moment, as the world outside boiled over with the revelations they had made, Ethan Carter understood that sometimes, in order to build a better future, you have to have the courage to tear down the corrupt structures of the present. The journey would be long and difficult, but now it had finally begun. The sun was setting over the city, painting the sky with shades of orange and red, as if the firmament itself reflected the tumultuous changes that had taken place over the last few days. Ethan Carter was sitting on a bench in the park, observing the families who strolled by carelessly, oblivious to the fact that the world they knew had been irrevocably altered. Next to him, Clara Reynolds was leafing through a newspaper, her eyes wide at the headlines that screamed of the revelations they had made. Corruption exposed, judicial system shaken, high-ranking politicians implicated in scandal. John Carter. Inheritance. Son concludes investigation into father. "It's surreal," muttered Clara, closing the newspaper. "It seems like yesterday we were running through that tunnel, running away from the police." Ethan nodded, a tired smile on his lips. "And now we're considered heroes by some and villains by others." The days following the live broadcast had been a whirlwind. Arrests of prominent figures, mass resignations, street protests. The system they had exposed was crumbling, and in the midst of the chaos, the first signs of real reform were emerging. "Ethan!" a familiar voice called out, making him turn around. Sarah Carter, his mother, was walking towards them, accompanied by Judge Thompson. Ethan stood up to hug his mother, feeling the relief of having her safe again. "Mom, it's good to see you. How are you?" Sarah held her son's face between her hands, her eyes shining with a mixture of pride and concern. "I'm fine, darling. But what about you? Have you been sleeping? Have you been eating properly?" Ethan laughed softly. Even in the midst of a national crisis, his mother still worried about the little things. "I'm fine, Mom, I promise." Judge Thompson snorted, getting everyone's attention. "Ethan, Clara, we have news. Congress is forming a special commission to investigate all the allegations and implement reforms in the judicial system. They want you to testify." Clara and Ethan exchanged glances. It was an opportunity to ensure that the truth was heard, that the necessary changes were implemented. But it also meant exposing themselves even more, facing those who would like to see them silenced. "Let's do this," said Ethan, his voice firm. "For my father, for everyone who has been harmed by this corrupt system." Clara nodded, placing a comforting hand on Ethan's shoulder. Together. The following weeks were intense. Depositions, interviews, endless meetings. Ethan found himself at the center of a media storm, his face splashed across newspapers and magazines, his story told and retold. But in the midst of the chaos, something unexpected began to happen. Ordinary people, inspired by Ethan and Clara's courage, began to speak out. Stories of past injustices came to light, and a grassroots movement began to form, demanding transparency and accountability in the justice system. One afternoon, as he was leaving yet another testimony session, Ethan was approached by a young woman, tears in her eyes. "Mr. Carter," she said, her voice shaking with emotion, "my father was wrongly convicted 10 years ago. Thanks to what you and Ms. Reynolds did, his case is being reopened. I just wanted to say thank you. Ethan felt a lump in his throat. This was what they had fought for people like her, for families torn apart by a flawed system. No need to thank me, he replied softly. It's what my father would have done. As the months passed, changes began to take shape. New transparency protocols were implemented, corrupt judges and prosecutors were removed, and a new generation of professionals committed to justice began to emerge. Ethan, however, was facing his own internal dilemma. His experience had shaken his faith in the system he had once sworn to defend. How could he go back to practicing law, knowing how deeply corrupted the structures could be? It was Clara who once again helped him find clarity. "Ethan," she said one evening as they walked through the city, "do you remember why your father became a lawyer?" Ethan frowned thoughtfully. "He always said it was to make a difference, to fight for those who couldn't fight for themselves." Clara smiled. "Exactly, and that's what you can do now. More than ever, the system needs people like you, people who know its flaws and are determined to put them right." Clara's words resonated deeply with Ethan. He realized that running away was not the answer. True courage lay in staying, in being part of the solution. Months turned into a year, and slowly, the storm began to calm. The Special Commission completed its work, implementing comprehensive reforms to the justice system. Ethan and Clara, recognized for their crucial role, were invited to lead a new watchdog organization, dedicated to ensuring integrity and transparency in the judiciary. One sunny afternoon, almost exactly a year after the broadcast that changed everything, Ethan found himself in the cemetery again, in front of his father's grave. "Hi, Dad," he said softly, placing a bouquet of flowers on the headstone. "We did it. Your fight, our fight, was not in vain." Ethan felt a presence beside him and turned to see Clara, who was smiling gently. "I thought I'd find you here," she said. Together they stood in silence for a moment, paying homage to the man whose courage had started it all. "You know," Ethan finally said, "I lost my father's pen that day. Sometimes I miss having it with me." Clara took his hand, entwining her fingers with his. "The pen was just an object, Ethan. Your father's true legacy lives on in you, in the changes we've made, in the lives we've touched." Ethan nodded, feeling a wave of emotion wash over him. He looked to the horizon, where the sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in vibrant colors. "So," said Clara, a mischievous glint in her eyes, "ready for the next chapter?" Ethan smiled, feeling truly at peace for the first time in a long time. "With you by my side? Always?" As they walked out of the cemetery, hand in hand, Ethan knew that the road ahead would still be challenging. There would be obstacles, setbacks, moments of doubt, but there would also be hope, change, and the opportunity to build something better. The journey that had begun with a simple pen had turned into something much bigger. It was a journey of truth, justice, and redemption. And as the sun set on this chapter of their lives, Ethan Carter knew that the dawn would bring with it new possibilities, new challenges, and the chance to continue his father's legacy, not through objects, but through actions that would truly make a difference in the world. The future, with all its uncertainties and promises, awaited. And Ethan, together with Clara and all those inspired by his struggle, was ready to face it, one step at a time, always in search of the truth and justice that his father valued so much.